welcome everyone. We are here once again this week reading Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Glad to be hanging out with all of y'all in these crazy times. I'll try to do the magic 1.5 minute recap of the past 89 pages of this book. Somebody that's quicker in the head than me could say how many pages per second I have. So there's an island called Guinn. It has a large mountain. There is a young boy by the name of Dunny, also goes by Sparrowhawk and Ged, among probably other names. Turns out Dunny has some latent magical abilities. His mother's dead. His dad is a dour blacksmith. He trains with his aunt, his mother's sister, who's a village witch. She teaches him what he can. He's a very fast learner, quickly proves more adept at most things than she is. What he's not very adept at is being humble. He is a cocky, prideful boy turning into a young man. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, some invaders come to the island of Gaunt. They're really messing things up, killing a bunch of people, burning things. It's not looking real good. Dunny's village, Ged's village, tries to mount a defense, but they don't really have a lot in their favor. And then it turns out that Ged has a trick up his sleeve and makes a magical mist and some illusionary spirits in the mist. And
all you needed to do was click the Zoom ID. That's all you needed to do.
So it's on now?
Yeah, it's on. No, I wanted to. Oh, come on.
So Ged saves the day, saves his village, goes and lives with the powerful wizard on the island, Ogion. They have a good relationship, but they're pretty different. Ogion's super mellow and doesn't talk much, and like we said, Ged wants to really be seen for how awesome he is. So eventually he gets the opportunity to go to the island of Roke to train at the wizard school, and he's like, frick yeah, I'm getting on that. And then he goes there and he continues to be prideful, and he has this one friend. What the heck was the friend's name? Not Lupin, some flower name. He's got this friend who's pretty cool. And this other guy he hangs out with, Jasper, who's they just really, Ged and Jasper really just butt heads. And goes and learns things in the tower, and learns all the names of things. And I'm not totally blowing my time limit. Skip ahead a few pages. Oh, gets that Otak, right? Gets that little critter who hangs out with him, which is pretty unusual. And then they have these celebrations and this like cool midsummer thing where they go play music down into the water. And then Vetch, that's the buddy's name. And then Jasper and Ged are gonna butt heads. They're gonna have a little duel. That doesn't really work out so well. Ged ends up summoning a shadow from the beyond. And let's see. Archmage ends up saving the day, but dies in the process. Ged's all screwed up and unconscious, and then he comes conscious again, and his wounds began to close, and the fever left him, and little by little he seemed to hear again. On a clear day of autumn, the master herbal opened the shutters of the room where Ged lay. Since darkness that night on Roke Knoll, he had known only darkness. Now he saw daylight, and the sun was shining. He hid his scarred face in his hands and wept. And that's where we left off last week. So,
Can you speak maybe a little louder or project a little more? It's like a little muffled.
Okay, I will probably project more now that I'm actually going to be reading and not just mumbling here. Someone interrupt me if this doesn't work in a minute when we actually pick up this week's text, which is happening now. Still, when winter came, he could speak only with a stammering tongue, and the master herbal kept him there in the healing chambers, trying to lead his body and mind gradually back to strength. It was early spring when at last the master released him, sending him first to offer his fealty to the Archmage Genscher, for he had not been able to join all the others of the school in this duty when Genscher came to Roke. None of his companions had been allowed to visit him in the months of his sickness, and now as he passed, some of them asked one another, "Who is that?" He had been light and lithe and strong. Now, lamed by pain, he went hesitantly. He did not raise his face, the left side of which was white with scars. He avoided those who knew him and those who did not, and made his way straight to the court of the fountain. There, where he once awaited Nemmerly, Genscher awaited him. Like the old Archmage, the new one was cloaked in white, but like most men of Way and the East Reach, Genscher was black-skinned, and his look was black, under thick brows. Ged knelt and offered him fealty and obedience. Genscher was silent for a while. "I know what you did," he said at last, "but not what you are. I cannot accept your fealty." Ged stood up and set his hand on the trunk of the young tree beside the fountain to steady himself. He was still very slow to find words. "Am I to leave Roke, my lord?" "Do you want to leave Roke?" "No." "What do you want?" "To stay, to learn, to undo the evil." Nemmerly himself could not do that. "No, I would not let you go from Roke. Nothing protects you but the power of the masters here and the defenses laid upon this island that keeps the creatures of evil away. If you left now, the thing you loosed would find you at once and enter into you and possess you. You would be no man but a Gebeth, a puppet doing the will of that evil shadow which you raised up into the sunlight. You must stay here until you gain strength and wisdom enough to defend yourself from it, if ever you do. Even now it waits for you. Assuredly it waits for you. Have you seen it? Have you seen it since that night?" "In dreams, Lord." After a while, Ged went on, speaking with pain and shame. "Lord Genscher, I do not know what it was, that thing that came out of the spell and cleaved to me." "Nor do I know. It has no name. You have great power inborn in you, and you used that power wrongly, to work a spell over which you had no control, not knowing how that spell affects the balance of light and dark, life and death, good and evil. And you were moved to do this by pride and by hate. Is it any wonder the result was ruin? You summoned a spirit from the dead, but with it came one of the powers of unlife. Uncalled, it came from a place where there are no names. Evil, it wills to work evil through you. The power you had to call it gives it great power over you. You are connected. It is the shadow of your arrogance, the shadow of your ignorance, the shadow you cast. Has a shadow a name? Ged stood sick and haggard. He said at last, "Better I had died." "Who are you to judge that? You for whom Nemmerly gave his life. You are safe here. You will live here and go on with your training. They tell me you are clever. Go on and do your work, Do it well. It is all you can do. So Genscher ended and was suddenly gone, as is the way of mages. The fountain leaped in the sunlight, and Ged watched it a while and listened to its voice, thinking of Nemmerly. Once in that court, he had felt himself to be a word spoken by sunlight. Now the darkness also had spoken, a word that could not be unsaid. He left the court, going to his old room in the south tower, which they had kept empty for him. He stayed there alone. When the gong called to supper, he went, but he would hardly speak to the other lads at the long table, or raise his face to them, even those who greeted him most gently. So, after a day or two, they all left him alone. To be alone was his desire, for he feared the evil he might do, say unwittingly. Neither Vetch nor Jasper was there, and he did not ask about them. The boys he had led and lorded over were all ahead of him now, because of the months he had lost, and that spring and summer he studied with lads younger than himself. Nor did he shine among them, for the words of any spell, even the simplest illusion charm, came halting from his tongue, and his hands faltered at their craft. In autumn, he was to go once again to the isolate tower to study with the master namer. This task, which he had once dreaded, now pleased him, for silence was what he sought, and long learning where no spells were wrought, and where that power which he knew was still in him would never be called upon to act. The night before he left the tower, a visitor came to his room, one wearing a brown traveling cloak and carrying a staff of oak shod with iron. Ged stood at the sight of the wizard's staff. Sparrowhawk? At that voice, Ged raised his eyes. It was Vetch standing there, solid and foursquare as ever, his black, blunt face older, but his smile unchanged. On his shoulder crouched a little beast, brindle-furred and bright-eyed. He stayed with me while you were sick, and now I am sorry to part with him, and sorrier to part with you, Sparrowhawk, but I'm going home. Here, Hug, go to your true master. Vetch patted the otak and set it down on the floor. It went and sat on Ged's pallet and began to wash its fur with a dry, brown tongue like a little leaf. Vetch laughed, but Ged could not smile. He bent down to hide his face, stroking the otak. I thought you wouldn't come to me, Vetch, he said. He did not mean any reproach, but Vetch answered, I couldn't come to you. The master Herbal forbade me, and since winter I've been with the master in the grove, locked up myself. I was not free until I earned my staff. Listen, when you too are free, come to the East Reach. I will be waiting for you. There's good cheer in the little towns there, and wizards are well received. Free, Ged muttered, and shrugged a little, trying to smile. Vetch looked at him, not quite as he had used to look, with no less love, but more wizardry, perhaps. He said gently, you won't stay bound on rope forever. Well, I have thought perhaps I may come to work with the master in the tower, to be one of those who seek among the books and the stars for lost names, and so do no more harm, if not much good. Maybe, said Vetch. I am no seer, but I see before you not rooms and books, but far seas and the fire of dragons and the towers of cities, and all things a hawk sees as he flies far and high. And behind me, what do you see behind me? Ged asked, and stood up as he spoke, so that the wear-light that burned overhead between them sent his shadow back against the wall and floor. Then he turned his face aside and said, stammering, "But tell me where you will go, what you will do." "I will go home to see my brothers and the sister you have heard me speak of. I left her a little child, and soon she'll be having her naming. It's strange to think of. And so I'll find me a job of wizardry somewhere among the little isles. Oh, I would stay and talk with you, but I can't. My ship goes out tonight, and the tide has turned already. Sparrowhawk, if ever your way lies east, come to me, and if ever you need me, send for me. Call on me by my name, Esteriol." At that, Ged lifted his scarred face, meeting his friend's eyes. "Esteriol," he said, "my name is Ged." Then, quietly, they bade each other farewell, and Vetch turned and went down the stone hallway and left Roke. Ged stood still a while, like one who has received great news and must enlarge his spirit to receive it. It was a great gift that Vetch had given him, knowledge of his true name. No one knows a man's true name but himself and his namer. He may choose at length to tell it to his brother, or his wife, or his set, or his friend, yet even those few will never use it where any third person may hear it. In front of other people, they will, like other people, call him by his use name, his nickname, such a name as Sparrowhawk and Vetch and Ogion, which means fir cone. If plain men hide their true name from all but a few they love and trust utterly, so much more must wizardly men, being more dangerous and more endangered. Who knows a man's name holds that man's life in his keeping. Thus, to Ged, who had lost faith in himself, Vetch had given him that gift only a friend can give, the proof of unshaken and unshakable trust. Ged sat down on his pallet and let the globe of wear-light die, giving off as it faded a faint whiff of marsh gas. He petted the otak, which stretched comfortably and went to sleep on his knee as if it had never slept anywhere else. The great house was silent. It came to Ged's mind that this was the eve of his own passage, the day on which Ogion had given him his name. 4 years were gone since then. Excuse me. He remembered the coldness of the mountain spring through which he had walked naked and unnamed. He fell to thinking of other bright pools in the river Ar, where he used to swim, and of Ten Alders village under the great slanting forests of the mountain and the shadows of morning across the dusty village street, and fire leaping under the bellows blast in the smith's smelting pit on a winter afternoon. The witch's dark, fragrant hut, where the air was heavy with smoke and wreathing spells. He had not thought of these things for a long time. Now they came back to him on this night. He was 17 years old. All the years and places of his brief, broken life came to mind. All the years and places of his brief, broken life came within mind's reach and made a whole again. He knew once more, at last, after this long, bitter, wasted time, who he was and where he was. But where he must go in the years to come, that he could not see, and he feared to see it. Next morning, he set out across the island, the otak riding on his shoulder as it had used to. This time, it took him 3 days, not 2, to walk to the isolate tower, and he was bone weary when he came within sight of the tower above the spitting, hissing seas of the northern cape. Inside, it was dark as he remembered, and cold as he remembered, and Kurum Kruk sat on his high seat writing down lists of names. He glanced at Ged and said without welcome, as if Ged had never been away, "Go to bed. Tired is stupid. Tomorrow you may open the book of the undertakings of the makers, learning the names therein. At winter's end he returned to the great house. He was made sorcerer then, and the archmage Genscher accepted at that time his fealty. Thenceforth he studied the high arts and enchantments, passing beyond arts of illusion to the works of real magery, learning what he must know to earn his wizard's staff. The trouble he had had in speaking spells wore off over the months, and skill returned into his hands. Yet he was never so quick to learn as he had been, having learned a long, hard lesson from fear. Yet no ill portents or encounters followed on his working even of the great spells of making and shaping, which are most perilous. He came to wonder at times if the shadow he had loosed might have grown weak or fled somehow out of the world, for it came no more into his dreams. But in his heart he knew such hope was folly. From the masters and from ancient lore books, Ged learned what he could about such beings as this shadow he had loosed. Little there was to learn. No such creature was described or spoken of directly. There were at best hints here and there in the old books of things that might be like the shadow beast. It was not a ghost of human man, nor was it a creature of the old powers of earth, and yet it seemed it might have some link with these. In the matter of the dragons, which Ged read very closely, there was a tale of an ancient dragon lord who had come under the sway of one of the old powers, a speaking stone that lay in a far northern land. At the stone's command, said the book, he did not speak to raise up a dead spirit out of the realm of the dead, but his wizardry being bent awry by the stone's will, there came with the dead spirit also a thing not summoned, which did devour him out from within, and in his shape walked, destroying men. But the book did not say what the thing was, nor did it tell the end of the tale, and the masters did not know where such a shadow might come from. From unlife, the archmage said. From the wrong side of the world, said the master changer. And the master summoner said, I do not know. The summoner had come often to sit with Ged in his illness. He was grim and grave as ever, but Ged knew now his compassion and loved him well. I do not know. I know of the thing only this, that only a great power could have summoned up such a thing, and perhaps only one power, only one voice, your voice. But what in turn that means, I do not know. You will find out. You must find out, or die, and worse than die. He spoke softly, and his eyes were somber as he looked at Ged. You thought, as a boy, that a mage is one who can do anything. So I thought once. So did we all. And the truth is that as a man's real power grows and his knowledge widens, even the way he can follow grows narrower, until at last he chooses nothing, but does only and wholly what he must do. The archmage sent Ged, after his 18th birthday, to work with the master patterner. What he learned in the imminent grove is not much talked about elsewhere. It is said that no spells are worked there, and yet the place itself is an enchantment. Sometimes the trees of the grove are seen, and sometimes they are not. And they are not always in the same place and part of Roke Island. It is said that the trees of the grove themselves are wise. It is said that the master patterner learns his supreme magery there within the grove, and if ever the trees should die, so shall his wisdom die. And in those days the waters will rise and drown the islands of Earthsea, which Segoy raised from the deeps in the time before myth, all the lands where men and dragons dwell. But all this is hearsay. Wizards will not speak of it. The months went by, And at last, on a day of spring, Ged returned to the great house, and he had no idea what would be asked of him next. At the door that gives on the path across the fields to Roke Knoll, an old man met him, waiting for him in the doorway. At first, Ged did not know him, and then putting his mind to it, recalled him as the one who had led him into the school on the first day of his coming, 5 years ago. The old man smiled, greeting him by name, and asked, "Do you know who I am?" Now Ged had thought before of how it was always said, the 9 masters of rope, although he knew only 8, wind key, hand, herbal, chanter, changer, summoner, namer, patterner. It seemed that people spoke of the archmage as the 9th. Yet, when a new archmage was chosen, 9 masters met to choose him. "I think you are the master doorkeeper," said Ged. "I am. Ged, your name won entrance to Roke. Ged, you won entrance to Roke by saying your name. Now you may win your freedom of it by saying mine." So said the old man, smiling, and waited. Ged stood dumb. He knew 1,000 ways and crafts and means for finding out names of things and of men. Of course, such craft was a part of everything he had learned at Roke, for without it, there could be little useful magic done. But to find out the name of a mage and a master was another matter. A mage's name is better hidden than a herring in the sea, better guarded than a dragon's den. A prying charm will be met with a stronger charm. Subtle devices will fail. Devious inquiries will be deviously thwarted, and force will be turned ruinously back upon itself. "You keep a narrow door, master," said Ged at last. "I must sit out in the fields here, I think, and fast till I grow thin enough to slip through." "As long as you like," said the doorkeeper, smiling. So Ged went off a little way and sat down under an alder on the banks of the Thwilburn, letting his otak run down to play in the stream and hunt the muddy banks for creek crabs. The sun went down, late and bright, for spring was well along. Lights of lantern and warelight gleamed in the windows of the great house, and down the hill the streets of Thwiltown filled with darkness. Owls hooted over the roofs, and bats flitted in the dusk above the streams. And still Ged sat thinking how he might, by force, ruse, or sorcery, learn the doorkeeper's name. The more he pondered, the less he saw. Among all the arts of witchcraft he had learned in these 5 years on Roke, among all the arts of witchcraft he had learned on these 5 years on Roke, any one that would serve to wrest such a secret from a mage. He lay down in the field and slept under the stars, with the otak nestling in his pocket. After the sun was up, he went, still fasting, to the door of the house and knocked. The doorkeeper opened. "Master," said Ged, "I cannot take your name from you, not being strong enough, and I cannot trick your name from you, not being wise enough. So I am content to stay here and learn or serve, whatever you will, until by chance you will answer a question I have." "Ask it." "What is your name?" The doorkeeper smiled and said his name, and Ged, repeating it, entered for the last time into that house. When he left it again, he wore a heavy dark blue cloak, a gift of the township of Low Torning, whereto he was bound, for they wanted a wizard there. He carried also a staff of his own height, carved of yew wood, bronze shod. The doorkeeper bade him farewell, opening the back door of the great house for him, the door of horn and ivory, and he went down the streets of Thwill to a ship that waited for him on the bright water in the morning. Small tea break. Back with you. Chapter 5. The Dragon of Pendor. West, in a crowd between the two great lands, ROSC and Ensma, lie in the 90 Isles. The nearest to Roke is Surd, and the farthest is Sepish, which lies in the Pelmish Sea. And whether the sum of the 90 is a question settled, for if you count only isles with freshwater springs, you might have 70, while if you count every rock, you might have 100 and still not be done, and then the tide would change. Narrow run the channels between the islets, and there the mild tide and high, all low. So where at high tide there might be 3 islands in one place, at low there might be 1. Yet for all that danger of the tide, every child who can walk can paddle, and has his little rowboat. Housewives row across the channel to take a cup of rush-wash tea with the neighbor. Peddlers call their wares in rhythm with the stroke of their oars. All roads there are salt water, blocked only by nets strung from house to house across the straits, to catch the small fish called turbies, the oil of which is the wealth of the 90 Isles. There are few bridges and no great towns. Every islet is thick with farms and fishermen's houses, and these are gathered into townships, each of 10 or 20 islets. One such was Low Torning, the westernmost, looking not on the inmost sea, but outward to the ocean. Look at lonely of the archipelago, where only Pendor lies, the dragon-spoiled isle, and beyond it the waters of the west reach, desolate. House was ready there for the township's new wizard. It stood on a hill among green fields of barley, sheltered from the west wind by a grove of pendant trees that were red with flowers. From the door one looked out on other thatched roofs and groves and gardens, and other islands with their roofs and fields and hills, and amongst them all the many bright winding channels of the sea. It was a poor house, windowless, with earthen floor, yet a better house than the one Ged was born in. The men of Low Torning, standing in awe of the wizard from Roke, asked pardon for its humbleness. "We have no stone to build with," said one. "We are none of us rich, though none starve," said another. And a third, "It will be dry at least, for I saw to the thatching myself, sir." To Ged, it was as good as any palace. He thanked the leaders of the township frankly, so that the 18 of them went home, each in his own rowboat to his home isle, to tell the fishermen and housewives that the new wizard was a strange, young, grim fellow who spoke little, but he spoke fairly and without pride. There was little cause, perhaps, for pride in this first magistry of Ged's. Wizards trained on Roke went commonly to cities or castles to serve high lords who held them in high honor. These fishermen of Low Torning, in the usual way of things, would have had among them no more than a witch or a plain sorcerer to charm their fishing nets and sing over new boats and cure beasts and men of their ailments. But in late years the old dragon of Pendor had spawned. 9 dragons, it was said, now laired in the ruined towers of the sea lords of Pendor, dragging their scaled bellies up and down the marble stairs and through the broken doorways there. Wanting food on that dead isle, they would be flying forth some year when they were grown and hunger came upon them. Already a flight of 4 had been seen over the southwest shores of ROSC, not alighting, but spying out the sheepfolds, barns, and villages. The hunger of a dragon is slow to wake, but hard to sate. So the Islemen of Low Torning had sent to Roke, begging for a wizard to protect their folk from what boded over the western horizon, and the archmage had judged their fear well-founded. There is no comfort in this place, the Archmage had said to Ged on the day he made him wizard. No fame, no wealth, maybe no risk. Will you go? I will go, Ged had replied, not from obedience only. Since the night on Roke Knoll, his desire had turned as much against fame and display as once it had been set on them. Always now he doubted his strength and dreaded the trial of his power. Yet also the talk of dragons drew him with a great curiosity. In Gaunt there have been no dragons for many hundred years, and no dragon would ever fly within scent or sight or spell of Roke. So that there also they were a matter of tales and songs only, things sung of but not seen. Yet had learned all he could of dragons at the school, but it was one thing to read about dragons and another to meet them. The chance lay bright before him, and heartily he answered, I will go. The Archmage Genscher had nodded his head, but his look somber. Tell me, he said at last, do you fear to leave Roke, or are you eager to be gone? Both, my lord. Again, Genscher nodded. I do not know if I do right to send you from your safety here, he said very low. I cannot see your way. It is all in darkness. There is a power in the north, something that would destroy you, but what it is and where, whether in your past or on your forward way, I cannot tell. It is all shadowed. When the men from Low Torning came here, I thought at once of you, for it seemed a safe place and out of the way, where you might have time to gather your strength. But I do not know if any place is safe for you, or where your way goes. I do not want to send you out into the dark. It seemed a bright enough place to get at first, the house under the flowering trees. There he lived and watched the western sky often, and kept his wizard's ear tuned for the sound of scaly wings. But no dragon came. Ged fished from his jetty and tended his garden patch. He spent whole days pondering a page or a line or a word in the lore books he had brought from Roke, sitting out in the summer air under the pendic trees while the otak slept beside him or went hunting mice in the forests of grass and daisies. And he served the people of Low Torning as heal-all and weather worker whenever they asked him. It did not enter his head that a wizard might be ashamed to perform such simple crafts, for he had been a witch child among poorer folk than these. They, however, asked little of him, holding him in awe, partly because he was a wizard from the Isle of the Wise, and partly on account of his silence and his scarred face. There was that about him, young as he was, that made men uneasy with him. Yet he found a friend, a boatmaker who dwelt on the next islet eastward. His name was Petchbury. They had met first on his jetty, where Ged stopped to watch him stepping the mast of a little catboat. He had looked up at the wizard with a grin and said, Here's a month's work nearly finished. I guess you might have done it in a minute with a word, eh, sir? I might, said Ged, but it would likely sink the next minute unless I kept the spells up. But if you like, he stopped. Well, sir? Well, that is a lovely little craft. She needs nothing. But if you like, I could set a binding spell on her to help keep her sound, or a finding spell to help bring her home from the sea. He spoke hesitantly, not wanting to offend the craftsman, but Petchbury's face shone. The little boat's for my son, sir, and if you would lay such charms on her, it would be a mighty kindness and a friendly act. Then he climbed up onto the jetty to take Ged's hand then and there and thank him. After that, they came to work together often, Ged interweaving his spellcrafts with Petchbury's handwork on the boats he built or repaired, and in return, learning from Petchbury how a boat was built and also how a boat was handled without aid of magic, for his skill of plain sailing had been somewhat scanted on rope. Often Ged and Peckbury and his little son Aya went into the channels and lagoons, sailing or rowing one boat or another, till Ged was a fair sailor, and a friendship between him and Peckbury was a settled thing. Along in late autumn, the boatmaker's son fell sick. The mother sent for the witch woman of Tesk Isle, who had a good hand at healing, and all seemed well for a day or two. Then, in the middle of a stormy night, came Peckbury hammering at Ged's door, begging him to come save the child. Ged ran down to the boat with him, and they rowed in all haste through dark and rain to the boatmaker's house. There, Ged saw the child on his pallet bed, and the mother crouching silent beside him, and the witch woman making a smoke of corley root and singing the Nagyan chant, which was the best healing she had. But she whispered to Ged, "Lord Wizard, I think this fever is the red fever, and the child will die of it tonight." When Ged knelt and put his hands on the child, he thought the same, and he drew back a moment. In the later months of his own long sickness, the master herbal had taught him much of the healer's lore, and the first lesson and the last of all that lore was this: heal the wound and cure the illness, but let the dying spirit go. The mother saw his movement and the meaning of it, and cried aloud in despair. Peckbury stooped down by her, saying, "The Lord Sparrowhawk will save him, wife. No need to cry. He's here now. He can do it." Hearing the mother's wail and seeing the trust Peckbury had in him, Ged did not know how he could disappoint them. He mistrusted his own judgment and thought perhaps the child might be saved if the fever could be brought down. He said, "I'll do my best, Peckbury." He set to bathing the little boy with cold rainwater that they brought new fallen from out of doors, and he began to say one of the spells of fever stay. The spell took no hold and made no hole, and suddenly he thought the child was dying in his arms. Summoning his power all at once and with no thought for himself, he sent his spirit out after the child's spirit to bring it back home. He called the child's name, "Ioth!" Thinking some faint answer came in his inward hearing, he pursued, calling once more. Then he saw the little boy running fast and far ahead of him down a dark slope, the side of some vast hill. There was no sound. The stars above the hill were no stars his eyes had ever seen, yet he knew the constellations by name: the sheaf, the door, the one who turns, the tree. They were those stars that do not set, that are not paled by the coming of any day. He had followed the dying child too far. Excuse me. Knowing this, he had found himself alone on the dark hillside. It was hard to turn back, very hard. He turned slowly. Slowly, he set one foot forward and climbed back up the hill, and then the other. Step by step, he went. Each step willed, and each step was harder than the last. The stars did not move. No wind blew over the dry, steep ground. In all the vast kingdom of darkness, only he moved, slowly, climbing. He came to the top of the hill and saw the low wall of stones there. But across the wall, facing him, there was a shadow. The shadow did not have the shape of man or beast. It was shapeless, scarcely to be seen. But it whispered to him, though there were no words in its whispering, and it reached out towards him, and it stood on the side of the living, and he on the side of the dead. Either he must go down the hill into the desert lands and lightless cities of the dead, or he must step across the wall back into life, where the formless evil thing awaited for him. His spirit staff was in his hand. and he raised it high. With that motion, strength came into him. As he made to leap the low wall of stones straight at the shadow, the staff burned suddenly white, a blinding light in that dim place. He leapt, felt himself fall, and saw no more. Now what Peckbury and his wife and the witch saw was this. The young wizard had stopped midway in his spell, and held the child a while motionless. Then he had laid little Ioth gently down on the pallet, and had risen and stood silent, staff in hand. All at once he raised the staff high, and it blazed with white fire as if he held the lightning bolt in his grip. And all the household things in the hut leapt out strange and vivid in that momentary fire. When their eyes were clear from the dazzlement, they saw the young man huddled forward on the earthen floor beside the pallet where the child lay dead. To Peckbury, it seemed that the wizard also was dead. His wife wept, but he was utterly bewildered. But the witch had some hearsay knowledge concerning magery and the ways a true wizard may go, and she saw to it that Guinn, cold and lifeless as he lay, was not treated as a dead man, but as one sick or tranced. He was carried home, and an old woman was left to watch and see whether he slept to wake or slept forever. The little Otok was hiding in the rafters of the house, as it did when strangers entered. There it stayed while the rain beat on the walls and the fire sank low, and the night wearing slowly along left the old woman nodding beside the hearth pit. Then the Otak crept down and came to Guinn, where he lay stretched stiff and still upon the bed, and began to lick his hands and wrists, long and patiently, with its dry, leaf-brown tongue. Crouching beside his head, it licked his temple, his scarred cheek, and softly his closed eyes. And very slowly, under the soft touch, Guinn roused. He woke, not knowing where he had been, or where he was, or what was the faint gray light in the air about him, which was the light of dawn coming into the world. Then the Otok curled up near his shoulder, as usual, and went to sleep. Later, when Guinn thought back upon that night, he knew that had none touched him when he lay thus spirit lost, had none called him back in some way, he might have been lost for good. It was only the dumb, instinctive wisdom of the beast who licks his hurt companion to comfort him. And yet in that wisdom, Guinn saw something akin to his own power, something that went as deep as wizardry. From that fourth time, he believed that the wise man is one who never sets himself apart from other living things, whether they have speech or not. And in later years, he strove long to learn what can be learned in science from the eyes of animals, the flights of birds, and the great, slow gesture of trees. He had now made unscathed, for the first time, that crossing over and return which only a wizard can make with open eyes, and which not the greatest mage can make without risk. But he had returned to a grief and a fear. The grief was for his friend Peckbury, and the fear was for himself. He knew now why the archmage had feared to send him forth, and what had darkened and clouded even the mage's foreseeing of his future. For it was darkness itself that had awaited him, the unnamed thing, the being that did not belong in the world, the shadow he had loosed or made. In spirit, at the boundary wall of death and life, it had waited for him these long years. It had found him there at last. It would be on his track now, seeking to draw near to him and to take his strength into itself, and suck up his life, and clothe itself in his flesh. Soon after, he dreamed of the thing like a bear, with no head or face. He thought it went fumbling about the walls of the house, searching for the door. Such a dream he had not dreamed since the healing of the wounds the thing had given him. When he woke, he was weak and cold, and the scars on his face and shoulder drew and ached. Now began a bad time. He dreamed of the shadow, or so much. When he dreamed of the shadow, or so much thought of it, he felt always the same cold dread. Sense and power drained out of him, leaving him stupid and astray. He raged at his cowardice, but that did no good. He sought for some protection, but there was none. The thing was not flesh, not alive, not spirit, unnamed, having no being but what he himself had given it, a terrible power outside the laws of the sunlit world. All he knew of it was that it was drawn to him and would try to work its will through him, being his creature. But in what form it would come, having no real form as its own, having no real form of its own as yet, and how it would come and when it would come, this he did not know. He set up what barriers of sorcery he could about his house and about the isle where he lived. Such spell walls must be ever renewed, and soon he saw that if he spent all his strength on these defenses, he would be of no use to the islanders. What could he do between two enemies if a dragon came to Pendor? Again he dreamed, but this time in the dream the shadow was inside his house, beside the door, reaching out to him through the darkness and whispering words he did not understand. He woke in terror and sent the werelight flaming through the air, lighting every corner of the little house till he saw no shadow anywhere. Then he put wood on the coals of his fire pit and sat in the firelight, hearing the autumn wind fingering the thatched roof and whining in the great bare trees above, and he pondered long. An old anger had awakened in his heart. He would not suffer this helpless waiting, this sitting trapped on a little island muttering useless spells of lock and ward. Yet he could not simply flee the trap. To do so would break his trust with the islanders and leave them to the imminent dragon, undefended. There was but one way to take. The next morning he went down among the fishermen in the principal moorage of Low Torning, and finding the head isleman there, said to him, "I must leave this place. I am in danger, and I put you in danger. I must go. Therefore, I ask your leave to go out and do away with the dragons on Pendor, so that my task for you will be finished, and I may leave freely. For if I fail, I should fail also when they come here, and that is better known now than later." The Isleman stared at him, all drop-jawed. "Lord Sparrowhawk," he said, "there are 9 dragons out there. 8 are still young," they said, "but the old one." "I tell you, I must go from here. I must ask your leave to rid you of the dragon peril, if I can do so." "As you will, sir," the Isleman said gloomily. All that listened there thought this was folly, or a crazy courage in their young wizard, and with sullen faces they saw him go, expecting no news of him again. Some hinted that he meant merely to sail back by ROSC to the inmost sea, leaving them in the lurch. Others, among them Peckbury, held that he had gone mad and sought death. For 4 generations of men, all there. Yeah, it's a good stopping spot. Peckbury had held that, among them Peckbury, held that he had gone mad and sought death. That's suitably dramatic as a stopping spot, right? What will happen next week with Ged and the dragon, the 9 dragons? Nobody knows. Come back next week, find out.
Thank you. You're awesome.
Thank you all. Stay safe.
You too.
Thank
This was
you.
so great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.